Marcus Chen stepped off the transport shuttle with nothing but a worn duffel bag and orders that seemed too good to be true. The Kepler Station garrison was supposed to be a quiet posting, a place where aging soldiers finished their careers watching empty space. At 22, Marcus looked young even by human standards, and his soft features and nervous smile made him appear even younger to the alien species that made up most of the Galactic Defense Force. Commander Vextar, a towering Krathari with 4 arms and scales that shifted color with his mood, looked down at the new arrival with barely concealed disgust. His scales had turned a dull brown, indicating his displeasure. "Another human whelp," he muttered in standard Galactic, not bothering to hide his disdain, as if one wasn't burden enough. The other human on the station, Lieutenant Sarah Kim, stepped forward to greet Marcus. She had been stationed here for 3 years and knew exactly what kind of reception humans received. The garrison consisted of 47 beings from 12 different species, and humans ranked near the bottom in terms of respect. Only the timid Polari were considered weaker. "Welcome to paradise," Sarah whispered to Marcus as she led him away from the commander. "Hope you brought entertainment because nothing ever happens here." The station orbited a dead planet in the neutral zone, monitoring space traffic and watching for the unlikely return of the Void Hunters, an extinct enemy that had terrorized the galaxy 2 centuries ago. Most of the crew treated it like a vacation posting. The Zenthari spent their time in meditation. The Gormath played endless games of strategy, and the insectoid Clicktar maintained the station's systems with mechanical precision. Marcus was assigned to the communications array, a job usually given to the least capable soldiers. As he settled into his quarters, a cramped room barely large enough for a bed and storage locker, he could hear the other species talking about him in the corridors. They didn't bother speaking quietly, assuming he couldn't understand their languages. "The new human looks even softer than the female," chittered Zeekth, one of the Clicktar technicians. "I've seen civilian cargo haulers with more backbone." Sergeant Major Thorne, a massive Gormath whose species was known for their warrior culture, laughed deeply. "Perhaps we should test his mettle, see if humans have any fight in them at all." Marcus said nothing, keeping his head down as he learned his duties. The communications array was outdated technology, but he approached it with genuine interest. While other species saw monitoring empty space as punishment, Marcus found patterns in the cosmic background radiation that intrigued him. He began making small adjustments to the sensors, increasing their sensitivity and range. "What are you doing to my equipment?" demanded Chief Technician Zardak, a Krathari who considered the comm array his personal domain. His scales flashed red with anger. "Just optimizing the signal clarity," Marcus replied quietly. "I noticed some interference patterns that could be filtered out." Zardak examined the readings and grudgingly admitted the improvements were significant. But instead of praise, he assigned Marcus double shifts, claiming the human needed to prove his worth before making any more changes. Days passed in a routine of work, meals, and sleep. Marcus kept to himself, speaking only when spoken to, and even then in soft, respectful tones. The other species began calling him Ghost because he moved so quietly through the station. Some took it as a sign of weakness, others of fear. During his 3rd week, Marcus was working the night shift when he detected something unusual. The sensors were picking up electromagnetic signatures at the edge of their range, patterns that didn't match any known ship designs. He enhanced the signal and felt his blood run cold. The patterns were identical to historical records of Void Hunter technology. Marcus immediately contacted Commander Vextar, who arrived at the communications center with obvious irritation. His scales were a mottled pattern of brown and red, showing both annoyance and anger. "This better be important, human. I don't appreciate being woken for sensor ghosts." Marcus pointed to his display. "Sir, these readings match Void Hunter electromagnetic signatures. Multiple contacts approaching from the Void reaches." Vextar studied the data, his scales gradually shifting to a pale blue, the color of concern among his species. The Void Hunters had been extinct for 200 years. Their entire civilization consumed by their own dark technology. Their ships had been unlike anything in the galaxy, powered by engines that seemed to devour space itself. "Run a full diagnostic on the sensors," Vextar ordered. "This is probably equipment malfunction," but the diagnostics came back clean and the signals were getting stronger. Within an hour, Other long-range monitoring stations began reporting similar contacts. The galaxy's military leadership was in chaos. The Void Hunters were supposed to be gone, their technology destroyed, their threat ended forever. Admiral Kavar of the Zenthari High Command issued orders for all frontier garrisons to maintain watchful positions and report any confirmed Void Hunter activity. The Kepler station crew, previously bored and complacent, suddenly found themselves on the front lines of a potentially galaxy-threatening situation. Marcus continued monitoring the approaching signals, tracking their movements and analyzing their patterns. The ships were moving in formations that defied conventional military doctrine, approaching from multiple vectors simultaneously. More disturbing, they seemed to be specifically targeting isolated frontier outposts, places exactly like Kepler Station. As the reality of their situation sank in, the garrison's attitude toward Marcus began to shift slightly. His detection of the Void Hunter fleet had potentially saved them from a surprise attack, but most still saw him as the lucky human who happened to be watching the sensors at the right time. Commander Vexitar called an emergency briefing, his scales now a deep purple indicating severe stress. Long-range sensors confirm multiple Void Hunter vessels approaching our sector. Fleet Command estimates they'll reach our position in 72 hours. The briefing room fell silent. Even the normally chatty Clicktar stopped their constant chittering. The Void Hunters were legend. Nightmare stories told to young soldiers about an enemy so terrible that the entire galaxy had united to destroy them. Their return meant the unthinkable had happened. "What are our orders, sir?" asked Lieutenant Kim. Vextar's scales darkened further. "We hold position and gather intelligence. Fleet Command wants detailed scans of their technology and capabilities." As the meeting dispersed, Marcus returned to his station with a growing sense of unease. Something about the Void Hunter approach patterns bothered him, but he couldn't quite identify what. The ships were moving with purpose, but their formations seemed almost familiar, as if he had seen them somewhere before. The next 48 hours transformed Kepler Station from a sleepy outpost into a fortress preparing for siege. Commander Vextar had every available crew member working around the clock to strengthen defenses and gather intelligence on the approaching Void Hunter fleet. The station's shields were brought to full power. Weapon systems were checked and rechecked, and emergency protocols were drilled until every being could perform them in their sleep. Marcus found himself assigned to an expanded role in communications and sensor analysis. His modifications to the array had proven invaluable in tracking the enemy fleet's movements, and even the skeptical Zardak admitted the human had improved their capabilities significantly. But respect was still in short supply. "The boy got lucky," Sergeant Major Thorne grumbled to a group of Gormith warriors. "Any fool watching sensors would have spotted ships that size." Gormith were the station's primary military force, 8 massive humanoids whose species had conquered half their home sector before joining the Galactic Defense Force. They treated warfare as both art and religion, and the idea of taking orders from species they considered weak grated against their nature. Humans, in their view, were barely qualified to carry supplies, let alone contribute to military planning. Despite the constant belittlement, Marcus continued his work with quiet dedication. He had identified 17 distinct Void Hunter vessels, ranging from massive dreadnoughts to smaller scout ships. Their technology readings were unlike anything in current galactic databases, showing energy signatures that seemed to bend the laws of physics. Lieutenant Kim found Marcus in the communications center during his 18th consecutive hour of duty. His eyes were red with fatigue, and his hands shook slightly as he adjusted sensor parameters. "You need to rest," she said firmly. "You're going to collapse." Marcus shook his head without looking away from his displays. "There's something about their formation pattern. I keep thinking I've seen it before, but I can't place where." Sarah studied the tactical display showing the Void Hunter fleet's approach. To her, it looked like standard military doctrine, multiple attack vectors designed to overwhelm defensive positions. "Maybe you're overthinking it. Sometimes enemy tactics are just straightforward." But Marcus wasn't convinced. He pulled up historical databases, searching through centuries of military records for similar patterns. The Void Hunters had been gone for 200 years, their tactics studied and analyzed until every military academy in the galaxy taught courses on their strategies. Yet something about this particular formation felt different, almost familiar in a way that made no sense. Commander Vextar entered the communications center, his scales now a steady deep blue indicating sustained stress. Fleet Command had been bombarding him with requests for updates, and the pressure was showing. 3 more frontier outposts had detected Void Hunter fleets approaching their positions, and panic was beginning to spread through the outer colonies. "Status report," Vexitar demanded. Marcus turned from his console, his young face serious despite his exhaustion. 17 confirmed vessels, sir. They'll reach weapons range in 18 hours. But Commander, there's something unusual about their approach pattern. Vexitar's scales flickered with irritation. Explain. They're not using standard Void Hunter tactics from the historical records. This formation is more adaptive. It's reacting to our defensive preparations in real time, adjusting to maximize their advantages while minimizing ours. The commander studied the tactical display, his military training warring with his prejudice against humans. The formation did seem unusually sophisticated, but he was reluctant to accept strategic analysis from someone he considered barely qualified for basic duties. Perhaps they've evolved their tactics during their absence, Vexitar said dismissively. Continue monitoring and report any significant changes. As the commander left, Marcus returned to his search through military databases. Hours passed as he cross-referenced formation patterns, battle tactics, and strategic doctrines from dozens of species and hundreds of conflicts. Most of the records were public domain, accessible to any military researcher studying galactic warfare. But deep in the classified archives, Marcus found something that made his heart race. The formation pattern wasn't Void Hunter at all, it was human. Specifically, it matched tactical doctrines developed by the Terran Colonial Defense Force during the Border Wars, 3 centuries ago. The formation was called Broken Arrow Protocol, designed for maximizing damage against superior forces while maintaining escape routes. Marcus stared at the records in confusion. The Border Wars had been internal human conflicts, fought long before first contact with alien species. The battles had taken place in distant star systems, far from current galactic civilization. There was no way the Void Hunters could have access to those tactics unless... A chill ran down Marcus's spine as he considered the implications. He pulled up more detailed records of the Border Wars, searching for any connection to Void Hunter technology or territories. What he found made him question everything he thought he knew about galactic history. The Border Wars hadn't been fought between human colonies, as the sanitized histories claimed. They had been fought between human colonies and something else, something the early records referred to only as the Dark Fleet, ships that used technology beyond human understanding, powered by engines that seemed to consume space itself. Marcus dug deeper into the classified archives, his security clearance barely sufficient to access the oldest files. The truth was buried under layers of classification and historical revision, but pieces of the puzzle began to form a terrifying picture. The Void Hunters hadn't disappeared 200 years ago. They had been human all along, or rather, they had once been human. The records spoke of colonies that had ventured too far into the void between galaxies, of experiments with technologies that no species should have attempted. They had found something in the dark spaces between stars, something that had changed them into the nightmare that would later threaten all galactic civilization. The realization hit Marcus like a physical blow. The approaching fleet wasn't using human tactics by coincidence. They were using them because they remembered being human. And if that was true, then everything the galaxy believed about the Void Hunter extinction was a lie. Marcus looked around the communications center, seeing his alien colleagues preparing for battle against an enemy they didn't truly understand. Should he share his discovery? Would anyone believe him? And more importantly, would knowing the truth help them survive what was coming? The young human made a decision that would change everything. He began copying the classified files to a secure drive, preparing to present evidence that would shatter the galaxy's understanding of one of its greatest threats. But as he worked, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something crucial, something that would make the difference between survival and annihilation. Outside the station, the Void Hunter fleet continued its approach, now close enough for detailed scans. Their ships moved with deadly grace through the void, carrying secrets that the galaxy had spent 2 centuries trying to forget. Marcus spent the next 6 hours in a state of controlled panic, downloading and analyzing every classified file he could access. The picture that emerged was more horrifying than he had imagined. The Void Hunters weren't just former humans. They were humans who had made contact with something that existed in the spaces between realities, something that fed on consciousness itself. The earliest records spoke of the Kepler expedition, a human deep space exploration mission that had disappeared 300 years ago while investigating anomalous readings in the void between galaxies. They had sent their last transmission from coordinates that matched exactly with the current location of Kepler Station. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. They were defending a position that marked humanity's first encounter with cosmic horror. As Marcus studied the files, Lieutenant Kim approached his station with a concerned expression. She had noticed his increasingly frantic behavior, and the way he kept glancing at the tactical displays showing the approaching fleet. "Marcus, you're starting to worry me. You've been acting strange ever since you found those formation patterns. What's going on?" Marcus looked up from his console, his young face showing the weight of terrible knowledge. "Sarah, what do you know about the Kepler expedition?" "Never heard of it." "Should I have? It was classified before either of us was born. But I think the Void Hunters are what happened to those explorers." Sarah's expression shifted from concern to alarm. "That's impossible. The Void Hunters are an alien species. They've been attacking galactic civilization for centuries." Marcus turned his screen so she could see the tactical analysis he had been working on. "Look at their formation patterns. They're not alien tactics, they're human military doctrine from the border wars. Specifically, protocols designed for fighting against overwhelming technological superiority." Before Sarah could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Commander Vextar's voice echoed over the intercom system, his words causing panic among the crew. "All hands to battle stations. Long-range sensors detect the Void Hunter fleet has increased speed. They'll be in weapons range in 2 hours, not 18. This is not a drill." The communications center exploded into activity as crew members rushed to their positions. Marcus watched the tactical display update in real time, showing the enemy fleet moving at speeds that should have been impossible for ships of their size. They were decelerating from faster-than-light travel, with a precision that suggested intimate knowledge of the station's defensive capabilities. "Sergeant Major," Thorne's voice boomed across the station's communication system as he organized the Gormith warriors. "All combat personnel to defensive positions. Prepare for boarding actions. Show these void spawn what happens when they face true warriors." But Marcus knew that traditional military thinking wouldn't work against this enemy. The Void Hunters had once been human, which meant they understood human psychology, human tactics, and human weaknesses better than any alien species ever could. Worse, they had been changed by contact with something that existed outside normal reality, giving them capabilities that defied conventional understanding. Commander Vextar arrived in the communications center, his scales now cycling rapidly between colors as his stress reached critical levels. "I need updated tactical analysis. How long do we have to prepare?" Marcus hesitated, knowing that his next words would either be dismissed as the ravings of a panicked recruit or taken seriously enough to change their entire defensive strategy. "Sir, I've discovered something about the Void Hunters that changes everything." "Speak quickly, human. We don't have time for lengthy explanations." "They're not aliens, sir. They're humans. Or they were humans before something changed them." Vextar's scales went completely still, locked in a pattern of deep red indicating extreme anger. "That's impossible. Human records clearly show first contact with galactic civilization occurred only 50 years ago." Marcus pulled up the classified files on his display. These records show that humans had deep space exploration capabilities centuries before official first contact. The Kepler expedition disappeared 300 years ago after investigating anomalous readings in this exact sector. The commander studied the data, his military training overriding his personal prejudices as he recognized the implications. If the Void Hunters were former humans, it explained their uncanny ability to predict and counter galactic military tactics. It also meant they possessed detailed knowledge of human psychology and behavior. "Why wasn't this information shared with the Galactic Defense Force?" Vextar demanded. "Because humanity's early leadership was terrified of being blamed for the Void Hunter threat," Marcus replied. "They buried the records and created false histories to hide their connection to the enemy." Lieutenant Kim had been listening to the exchange with growing horror. "If they're really former humans, then they might try to communicate with us. Maybe we can negotiate." Marcus shook his head grimly. The records suggest they're no longer capable of normal communication. Whatever they encountered in the void between galaxies changed them fundamentally. They're not human anymore, even if they remember being human. The tactical display updated again, showing the Void Hunter fleet had assumed attack formations just outside the station's weapons range. Their ships hung in space like predators studying their prey, broadcasting no communication signals and responding to no attempts at contact. The silence was more unnerving than any threat or demand could have been. Commander Vextar made a decision that went against every instinct of his warrior species. Instead of preparing for glorious battle, he began issuing orders for strategic withdrawal. All non-essential personnel to the evacuation pods. Combat teams prepare for delaying actions while civilians escape. Sergeant Major Thorne's protests echoed through the communication system. Sir, the Gormath do not retreat. We will hold this station against any enemy. Your courage is noted, Sergeant Major, but this enemy is beyond conventional military response. We need to preserve our forces and gather intelligence for Fleet Command. As evacuation procedures began, Marcus remained at his station, continuing to monitor the enemy fleet and analyze their movements. The Void Hunter ships maintained their positions with mechanical precision, neither advancing nor retreating. It was as if they were waiting for something. Then Marcus noticed something that made his blood run cold. The enemy formation wasn't just tactically sound. It was identical to defensive positions used by the original Kepler expedition, as if they were recreating their last stand from 3 centuries ago. The Void Hunters weren't just attacking the station. They were returning to the place where their transformation had begun. The realization brought a new understanding of their enemy's motivations. This wasn't a random attack or a military conquest. It was a pilgrimage, a return to the coordinates where humanity had first encountered the cosmic horror that had consumed them. And if Marcus was right about their intentions, the station's destruction was just the beginning of something far worse. The evacuation proceeded with military efficiency, but Marcus could see the fear in every crew member's eyes. The Clicktar moved with mechanical urgency, their chittering replaced by ominous silence. The Zenthari meditated even as they packed essential equipment, seeking inner calm in the face of cosmic terror. Even the proud Gormath warriors showed signs of unease, their usual boastful behavior replaced by grim determination. Marcus remained at his communication station, monitoring the Void Hunter fleet as the last evacuation pods launched from the station. The enemy ships maintained their positions with unnatural patience, as if they knew exactly how long the evacuation would take. This level of tactical awareness suggested they had detailed intelligence about Galactic Defense Force procedures. Commander Vextar approached the communications console, his scales now a pale gray indicating resignation. You should be on the last evacuation pod, human. There's no reason for you to stay. Someone needs to maintain sensor contact with the enemy fleet, Marcus replied quietly. Fleet Command will need real-time intelligence about their capabilities. The commander studied the young human with new respect. Throughout the crisis, Marcus had shown courage and dedication that belied his soft appearance. More importantly, his discovery about the Void Hunter's true nature had potentially saved lives by convincing Vextar to evacuate rather than fight a hopeless battle. Very well, but you leave with the command staff in 15 minutes. That's an order. As Vextar moved to coordinate the final evacuation procedures, Marcus noticed something disturbing on his sensors. The Void Hunter fleet was beginning to move, but not toward the station. Instead, they were arranging themselves in a perfect sphere around the coordinates where the original Kepler expedition had vanished 3 centuries ago. Marcus enhanced the sensor readings and felt his heart sink. The Void Hunter ships weren't just positioning themselves randomly, they were creating some kind of geometric pattern in space. Energy readings from their engines showed massive power buildups far beyond anything needed for conventional weapons or propulsion. Commander, Marcus called out urgently. The Void Hunters are implementing some kind of large-scale energy pattern. Power readings are off the charts. Vextar rushed back to the communication station, studying the tactical display with growing alarm. The 17 enemy ships had formed a precise geometric arrangement that resembled nothing in any military database. More disturbing, space itself seemed to be reacting to their presence, with sensor readings showing impossible distortions in local reality. What are they doing? Vextar demanded. Marcus frantically searched through the classified files he had downloaded. looking for any reference to similar patterns or activities. What he found made him realize that evacuating the station wouldn't be enough to escape what was coming. "Sir, according to the Kepler expedition's final transmissions, they detected a dimensional anomaly at these coordinates, something that existed between normal space and somewhere else. I think the Void Hunters are trying to reopen that gateway." The implications hit both officers simultaneously. If the Void Hunters could reopen the dimensional anomaly that had transformed them, they might be able to bring more of whatever had consumed them into normal space. The threat wouldn't be limited to a few dozen ships. It could be an invasion by forces that existed outside the known universe. Vextar's scales shifted to deep purple as he grasped the magnitude of the situation. "Contact Fleet Command immediately. Priority Alpha transmission." Marcus began broadcasting on all emergency frequencies, but the response was immediate and devastating. The Void Hunter ships had begun generating some kind of interference field that blocked all faster-than-light communications. Kepler station was completely cut off from outside help. "We're on our own," Marcus reported grimly. The station shuddered as gravitational anomalies began manifesting around the Void Hunter formation. Emergency lights flickered as power systems struggled to compensate for the impossible energy readings flooding their sensors. Through the observation ports, they could see space itself beginning to bend and twist around the enemy ships. Lieutenant Kim's voice crackled over the intercom from the Evacuation Coordination Center. "All pods away except the command shuttle. We need to leave now." But Marcus was studying the enemy formation with growing understanding. The geometric pattern the Void Hunters had created wasn't just random. It was a precise mathematical structure designed to stress the boundaries between dimensions. And at the center of that pattern, space was beginning to tear. "Commander, we can't leave," Marcus said quietly. Vextar's scales flashed red with anger. "Explain that statement, recruit." "If they succeed in opening that dimensional gateway, the threat won't be limited to this sector. Whatever consumed the Kepler expedition will have direct access to our reality. We might be the only ones in position to stop them." The commander looked at the young human with a mixture of disbelief and respect. "You're suggesting that a communications technician and a garrison commander can stop a threat that Fleet Command considers impossible to defeat?" Marcus turned back to his console, his fingers flying over the controls as he analyzed the enemy's energy patterns. "Not stop them, sir, but maybe disrupt their operation long enough for reinforcements to arrive. The nearest fleet elements are 6 hours away, and our communications are blocked. Then we buy 6 hours." Vextar stared at Marcus for a long moment, seeing something in the young human's eyes that hadn't been there before. The soft, nervous recruit had been replaced by someone with steel in his spine and fire in his eyes. It was a transformation that spoke to depths of character that none of the garrison had suspected. "What do you propose?" Vextar asked. Marcus pulled up the station's weapon systems on his display. Kepler Station wasn't a military fortress, but it had defensive capabilities designed to deter pirates and raiders. More importantly, it had a powerful reactor that could be overloaded under extreme circumstances. The Void Hunters are creating a dimensional resonance field. If we can disrupt the geometric precision of their formation, we might be able to collapse their gateway before it fully opens. "And how do we disrupt ships that powerful with a garrison station's weapons?" Marcus smiled grimly, and for the first time since arriving at Kepler Station, he looked like someone who belonged in a military uniform. "We don't attack their ships, sir. We attack the space between them." The plan that Marcus outlined was audacious, desperate, and probably suicidal. But as space continued to tear apart around the Void Hunter formation, both officers realized it might be their only chance to prevent something far worse than the destruction of a single space station. Outside, the enemy ships pulsed with dark energy as they worked to summon horrors from beyond the void between galaxies. Marcus's plan required precise timing and a level of technical expertise that pushed both him and the station's systems to their absolute limits. Using the communications array as a targeting system, he began calculating firing solutions that would place the station's defensive weapons at specific points in space between the Void Hunter ships, rather than targeting the vessels themselves. "The dimensional gateway requires perfect geometric alignment," Marcus explained as he worked frantically at his console. "If we can create enough gravitational distortion at key intersection points, we might be able to destabilize their formation." Commander Vextar watched the calculations with growing amazement. The mathematical precision required was staggering, and the young human was performing computations that would challenge advanced artificial intelligence systems. Where did you learn to do this kind of analysis? Marcus didn't look up from his work. My father was a theoretical physicist. He used to let me help with his research when I was a kid. I never thought dimensional mechanics would be useful in the military. The station's weapon systems were never designed for the kind of precision work Marcus was attempting. The defensive cannons were meant to fire at large targets at relatively close range, not create microsecond-timed explosions at specific coordinates in deep space. But Marcus had been modifying and optimizing systems since his arrival, and he understood the station's capabilities better than anyone. Lieutenant Kim's voice came over the intercom again, edged with panic. Command, we're detecting massive energy buildups from the Void Hunter formation. Whatever they're doing, it's accelerating. Through the observation ports, the dimensional tear was becoming visible to the naked eye. Space around the enemy formation rippled like water, with colors that shouldn't exist bleeding through from whatever lay beyond normal reality. The sight was mesmerizing and terrifying, suggesting vast intelligences that existed outside the boundaries of known physics. Fire control ready, Marcus reported. I need you to override the safety protocols on the main reactor, sir. We're going to need more power than the station was designed to provide. Vextar hesitated. Overriding reactor safety protocols was tantamount to setting a bomb that could destroy the station and everyone aboard. But the alternative was allowing something infinitely worse to enter their reality. Override authorized, the commander said grimly. Marcus began the firing sequence, targeting 8 specific points in space around the Void Hunter formation. The station's defensive cannons swiveled to angles that seemed impossible, guided by calculations that accounted for gravitational lensing, quantum uncertainty, and dimensional stress factors that most engineers couldn't even pronounce. The first salvo fired with mathematical precision, plasma charges detonating at exact coordinates around the enemy ships. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then space itself shuddered as gravitational waves propagated through the Void Hunter formation. The enemy ships wavered in their positions, their perfect geometric alignment disrupted by the artificial gravity wells Marcus had created. The dimensional tear flickered, its edges becoming unstable as the resonance field lost coherence. But the Void Hunters adapted with frightening speed. Their ships began compensating for the gravitational distortions, moving to re-establish their formation with mechanical precision. Worse, they had identified the source of the interference and were beginning to turn their attention toward Kepler Station. They're targeting us, Vextar observed as sensor readings showed massive energy signatures focusing on their position. Marcus fired a second salvo, this time targeting different coordinates as the enemy formation shifted. The gravitational disruptions were having an effect, but not enough to completely collapse the dimensional gateway. He needed more power, more precision, and more time than they had available. Sir, I need to reconfigure the station's main reactor as a directed energy weapon. Vextar's scales went pale with shock. That will destroy the station. Better than letting them complete their ritual. As Marcus worked to reconfigure the reactor output, the first Void Hunter energy beam struck Kepler Station. The impact sent shockwaves through the structure, and emergency systems screamed warnings about hull breaches and power fluctuations. The station's shields held but barely. Hull integrity at 60%, Lieutenant Kim reported from the Damage Control Center. We can't take many more hits like that. Marcus ignored the alarms and continued his work, rerouting power systems and modifying energy output parameters. The station's reactor was never designed to function as a weapon, but the principles were sound. If he could channel the reactor's full output through the communications array, he might be able to create a focused gravitational pulse powerful enough to shatter the Void Hunter's dimensional gateway. A second enemy beam struck the station, this one targeting the communications array directly. Marcus was thrown from his chair as the console exploded in sparks, but he scrambled back to continue his work despite burns on his hands and face. Reactor modification complete, he reported through gritted teeth. One shot and then we're done. Commander Vextar looked at the young human with something approaching awe. Throughout the crisis, Marcus had displayed technical brilliance, tactical innovation, and personal courage that belied every assumption about human capabilities. The soft recruit had revealed himself to be a warrior worthy of respect from any species. "Do it," Vextar ordered. Marcus triggered the reactor pulse, channeling the station's entire power output through the modified communications array. The energy beam that erupted from Kepler Station was unlike anything in the Galactic arsenal, a focused gravitational lance that struck the center of the Void Hunter formation with the force of a collapsing star. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The dimensional gateway collapsed in on itself, dragging 2 of the Void Hunter ships into the resulting gravitational anomaly. The remaining ships were scattered by the implosion, their perfect formation destroyed and their ritual interrupted, but the victory came at a terrible cost. Kepler Station's reactor had been completely depleted, and massive system failures were cascading throughout the structure. Emergency power was failing, life support was compromised, and the station was beginning to break apart under the stress of the gravitational pulse. "All hands abandon station," Vextar ordered, emergency evacuation protocols in effect. As they ran toward the command shuttle, Marcus caught one last glimpse of the enemy formation. The surviving Void Hunter ships were retreating into the void between galaxies. Their mission failed, but their threat far from ended. They had been stopped this time, but they would return. And next time, the galaxy would be ready for them, thanks to the intelligence gathered by a naive recruit who had proven to be anything but what he seemed. The command shuttle launched just as Kepler Station began its final collapse, carrying the survivors away from a battle that would be remembered as the day humanity proved its worth to the galaxy. The command shuttle limped through space with failing life support and damaged engines, carrying the survivors of Kepler Station toward the nearest inhabited system. Commander Vextar worked frantically at the pilot controls while Marcus attempted to restore communications using salvaged equipment from the station. Lieutenant Kim coordinated emergency medical care for the injured crew members, though their supplies were dangerously limited. The shuttle held 23 survivors from the original garrison of 47. The evacuation pods had carried most of the crew to safety, but the final assault on the Void Hunter formation had cost them dearly. 3 Gormith warriors had died defending the engineering section, 2 Clicktar technicians had been lost when the communications array exploded, and Chief Technician Zardak had sacrificed himself to maintain reactor stability during the final pulse. As they traveled through hyperspace, Marcus finally managed to restore partial communications. His first priority was contacting Fleet Command with intelligence about the Void Hunter attack and their true nature. The response from Galactic Defense Force headquarters was immediate and explosive. "This is Admiral Kiever of Central Command," came the transmission. "Repeat your previous message about Void Hunter origins. Did you claim they are former humans?" Marcus looked to Commander Vextar, who nodded grimly. "Confirmed, Admiral. We have classified records showing the Void Hunters originated from a human deep space expedition that disappeared 3 centuries ago. They encountered something in the void between galaxies that transformed them. The silence that followed was long enough to make them wonder if the transmission had been lost. When Admiral Kiever spoke again, his voice carried the weight of terrible understanding. "Commander Vexistar, you and your crew are ordered to report directly to Central Command. Maximum security protocols are now in effect. The information you've discovered changes everything we thought we knew about this threat." During the 3-day journey to Central Command, word of the battle at Kepler Station began spreading through the galactic communication networks. The official reports described a heroic last stand against overwhelming Void Hunter forces, but they carefully omitted any mention of the enemy's true origins. That information was classified at the highest levels, shared only with species leaders and senior military commanders. But another story was spreading through unofficial channels. The story of a young human recruit who had single-handedly identified the enemy threat, decoded their tactics, and engineered the defense that saved not just the station, but potentially the entire galaxy. Marcus found himself the subject of intense curiosity from crew members who had previously dismissed him as weak and incompetent. Sergeant Major Thorne, one of the Gormith survivors, approached Marcus during the 2nd day of their journey. The massive warrior's usual arrogance had been replaced by something resembling respect. "Human," Thorne said in his rumbling voice. "I owe you an apology. I judged you by appearance rather than capability. Among my people, such misjudgment is considered a grave failing. Marcus looked up from the communication equipment he was repairing. No apology necessary, Sergeant Major. Humans don't look like warriors by galactic standards. I understand why you made assumptions. But you fought like a warrior when it mattered, Thorne continued. Your actions at Kepler Station will be remembered in Gormath battle songs. Few beings have earned such honor. Similar conversations occurred throughout the journey, as crew members reassessed their understanding of human capabilities. The quiet, nervous recruit had revealed himself to be a technical genius, tactical innovator and combat veteran worthy of respect from any species. But Marcus remained modest about his achievements, focusing instead on preparing his intelligence reports for Central Command. When they finally arrived at Central Command Station, the largest military facility in the galaxy, Marcus was surprised to find himself immediately separated from the other survivors. Instead of being debriefed with the rest of the crew, he was escorted to a secure conference room, where some of the most powerful beings in galactic civilization waited to question him. Admiral Kavar was there, his Zenthari features showing the strain of recent revelations. General Morduk of the Krathari High Command sat beside him, scales shifting nervously between colors. Even High Coordinator Zephys of the Galactic Council had attended, her crystalline form gleaming under the conference room's lights. Technician Chen, Admiral Kavar began formally. Your actions at Kepler Station have been reviewed by the highest levels of galactic leadership. We have questions that only you can answer. For the next 6 hours, Marcus was questioned about every aspect of the battle. His technical modifications to the sensor array, his discovery of the classified human records, his tactical analysis of void hunter formations, and his improvised gravitational weapon. The military leaders hung on every word, taking detailed notes and asking for clarification on points that would reshape galactic defense strategy. But the most intense questioning focused on Marcus's background and training. How had a young communications technician acquired the knowledge and skills to outthink an enemy that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries? My father was Dr. James Chen, Marcus explained quietly. He was part of the team that developed humanity's first faster-than-light drive. He spent his career studying dimensional mechanics and theoretical physics. I grew up helping with his research. General, Morduk's scales shifted to deep blue, indicating profound thought. You're saying that human educational practices include training children in advanced theoretical sciences? Not all children, Marcus replied. But human families often share knowledge across generations. My father taught me because I showed interest and aptitude. The revelation that humans routinely educated their young in subjects that other species reserved for advanced specialists sparked intense discussion among the leadership. They began to understand that human society was structured very differently from their own, with knowledge being shared more freely and innovation being encouraged rather than controlled. High Coordinator Zephys spoke for the first time, her crystalline voice resonating with harmonics that conveyed deep concern. If the Void Hunters are indeed former humans, then they possess detailed knowledge of human psychology, capabilities, and potential. This makes humanity both uniquely vulnerable to their influence and uniquely valuable as allies against them. Admiral Kavar nodded gravely. Which brings us to the reason for this meeting. Technician Chen, the Galactic Defense Force is prepared to offer you a commission as Strategic Intelligence Specialist with immediate promotion to Lieutenant Commander rank. Your insights into Void Hunter capabilities could save countless lives. Marcus considered the offer carefully. A commission would mean leaving behind his simple life as a communications technician and accepting responsibility for shaping galactic military strategy. But the alternative was allowing others to face an enemy they didn't truly understand. I accept, Marcus said simply. As the meeting concluded, Marcus realized that his life had changed forever. The naive recruit who had arrived at Kepler Station no longer existed. In his place stood someone who had faced cosmic horror and emerged victorious, earning the respect of species that had previously considered humans inferior. But the greater test was yet to come. The Void Hunters had been driven back, not defeated. And now they knew that their secret was no longer safe. 6 months after the Battle of Kepler Station, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Chen stood before the largest military assembly in galactic history. Representatives from 47 species had gathered at Central Command to hear his briefing on Void Hunter capabilities and the new defensive strategies developed from captured intelligence. The young man who had once been dismissed as a naive recruit now commanded the attention of the galaxy's greatest military minds. The transformation in how other species viewed humanity had been remarkable. What had started as grudging respect for Marcus's individual accomplishments had evolved into genuine curiosity about human potential. Military academies across the galaxy were requesting human instructors to teach courses on innovation and adaptive thinking. Trade delegations were visiting Earth to study human educational methods and technological development. But Marcus knew that the real test was yet to come. Intelligence reports from the frontier suggested that the Void Hunters were massing in the void between galaxies, preparing for a coordinated assault that would dwarf their previous attacks. The dimensional gateway they had attempted to open at Kepler Station was just one of dozens of similar projects they were pursuing across the galaxy's rim. The enemy we face is not merely technologically superior, Marcus explained to the assembled commanders. They possess intimate knowledge of our psychology, our tactics, and our weaknesses. They were once part of our galactic community, which means they understand us better than we understand ourselves. General Mordak raised one of his forearms to ask a question. You speak of them as if they retain their original identities. Are they still the same beings who disappeared centuries ago? Marcus activated a holographic display showing analysis of Void Hunter communications intercepted during recent skirmishes. They remember being who they were, but they've been fundamentally changed by contact with entities that exist outside our reality. Think of them as echoes of their former selves, twisted by influences we can barely comprehend. The assembled commanders studied the intelligence data with growing unease. The Void Hunters weren't just using advanced technology. They were employing psychological warfare techniques that exploited the specific fears and cultural weaknesses of each species they encountered. They knew exactly how to break Gormath battle formations, how to confuse Zenthari meditation techniques, and how to disrupt Clicktar hive communication. Admiral Kavar stood to address the assembly. Lieutenant Commander Chen has developed a comprehensive defense strategy based on his understanding of the enemy's capabilities. The plan requires unprecedented cooperation between all galactic species and significant changes to our traditional military doctrine. Marcus took over the briefing, outlining a strategy that shocked many of the assembled commanders. Instead of the traditional approach of massing forces at strategic points, he proposed a distributed defense network that would rely on rapid response and adaptive tactics. Most surprisingly, he recommended placing human advisors with every major fleet in Garrison, not as commanders but as consultants who could provide alternative perspectives on enemy behavior. The Void Hunters expect us to respond according to established patterns, Marcus explained. They've studied our species for centuries and know how we think. But humans think differently because we developed in isolation from galactic civilization. Our approaches often seem chaotic or illogical to other species, which makes them unpredictable to the enemy. High Coordinator Zephys resonated with harmonics of concern. You're asking us to abandon military doctrines that have served us for millennia in favor of strategies developed by a species that has only recently achieved interstellar travel. I'm asking you to supplement your existing capabilities with new perspectives. Marcus replied respectfully. Humans aren't better warriors than Gormath, better tacticians than Krathari, or better engineers than Clicktar. But we think about problems differently, and that difference might be enough to surprise an enemy that thinks they know everything about us. The debate that followed was intense, with many commanders expressing skepticism about Marcus's proposals. But his record at Kepler Station spoke for itself, and gradually the assembly began to accept that desperate times required desperate measures. The Void Hunter threat was unlike anything they had faced before, and conventional responses had proven inadequate. Over the following months, Marcus found himself at the center of the galaxy's largest military reorganization in recorded history. Human advisors were assigned to fleet commands across the galaxy, often over the objections of species that still considered humans inferior. But as these partnerships developed, something remarkable began to happen. The human tendency toward improvisation and creative problem-solving began to influence alien military thinking. Gormath warriors started incorporating unexpected tactics into their battle plans. Centauri commanders learned to embrace chaos as a strategic tool. Even the methodical Clicktar began experimenting with spontaneous responses to enemy actions. Meanwhile, humans working alongside other species were exposed to levels of discipline, coordination, and strategic thinking that elevated their own capabilities. The partnerships became genuinely collaborative, with each species contributing their unique strengths to create military units more effective than either could have achieved alone. The first major test of these new strategies came when Void Hunter fleets attacked the Rigel sector, targeting a major shipyard complex that supplied the Galactic fleet. The defense was coordinated by Admiral Kavar with human advisor Captain Sarah Kim, Marcus's former colleague from Kepler Station, who had earned her own promotion based on her performance during the crisis. The battle lasted 3 days and showcased the effectiveness of the new integrated approach. When Void Hunter forces attempted to use their traditional psychological warfare techniques, they found themselves facing opponents who responded in completely unexpected ways. Human advisors suggested tactical maneuvers that seemed chaotic, but disrupted enemy predictions. Alien commanders provided the discipline and coordination needed to execute these unconventional strategies effectively. The Void Hunters were driven back with heavy losses, marking the first major galactic victory against them in over a century. More importantly, captured enemy communications revealed confusion and frustration among their forces. For the first time in their long war against galactic civilization, they were facing an enemy they couldn't predict or understand. As news of the victory spread across the galaxy, Marcus received a communication that changed everything. Deep space monitoring stations had detected massive Void Hunter formations massing in the void between galaxies, not for scattered raids, but for a coordinated assault on the galactic core itself. The enemy was preparing for a final battle that would determine the fate of all intelligent life. Standing in his office at Central Command, looking out at the stars that had once seemed so peaceful, Marcus realized that everything they had accomplished was just preparation for the real war. The Battle of Kepler Station had been the opening move in a conflict that would test not just human courage, but the ability of all galactic species to work together against an enemy that sought to consume reality itself. The naive recruit was gone forever, replaced by a leader who carried the hopes of countless worlds. And in the darkness between the stars, ancient horrors stirred, preparing for a confrontation that would echo across the cosmos for millennia to come. The galaxy's survival would depend on whether the bonds forged in desperation could withstand the ultimate test of cosmic war.